Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have March for Our Lives Executive Director Jaclyn Corin with us today. We'll chat with Jackie in just a few moments, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Jaclyn Corin is co-founder and executive director of March for Our Lives, a leading youth-led advocacy organization working to end gun violence in the United States. A survivor of the 2018 mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, she helped catalyze one of the largest youth protests in American history and elevate gun violence as a central national issue. In the years since, she has led high-impact campaigns to hold the gun lobby and elected officials accountable and built one of the largest youth organizing networks in the country, supporting hundreds of student-led groups nationwide. As executive director, she leads March for Our Lives' work at the intersection of advocacy, narrative change, and youth organizing, equipping young people across the country to drive political and cultural change in their communities. Jackie, welcome into the back room.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start with, you're a survivor of the horrific, deadly shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on February 14th, 2018.
Yeah.
So much has been discussed over the years about what happened that day, but I'd like to ask you about the day before. Tell us about what your life was like before the shooting, who you were, your interests, and how you saw your future before that fateful day changed everything.
Thanks for asking this. I feel like usually life is, and interviews are usually focused on the after, understandably, of course, because it has shaped my life in such a significant way. But
And the reason I ask you is because I identify with you. My wife, Adrienne Shelley, she was a filmmaker and an actress. She was murdered. And I made a documentary about her. It's on HBO. It's called Adrienne. And the first thing I basically say in the film is every horrible day in history has a much happier day before.
yeah, I mean, the day before, I was a child when I survived this shooting. And it's really crazy to look back now 8 years later, and I'm adult and I'm 25 years old. I live in DC. I work a full-time job, but back then I felt so old, but I wasn't. I was a child. And so I was like any other high schooler who was really involved in school. I, was in my key club doing volunteer work. I was a dancer. One of my friends that I danced with was Jamie Guttenberg, who ended up being a victim of the shooting.
I know her father really well.
Yeah, Fred is wonderful. And, I would go to school and I would do my thing. I was actually in my student government. So the day before, I was feeling really stressed because we were running a carnation drive the next day on Valentine's Day, the day of the shooting. So I remember going to bed just hoping it all ran smoothly and that it wasn't too stressful. But that was really my day before. I had no worries. Parkland was one of the safest communities in all of Florida. I could walk the streets, roam around without a fear, without a worry. But that all changed the next day.
And when you looked ahead to college and what you planned to study and what you perhaps started thinking about what your future would be like in terms of what you would do for work, I'm sure you never thought that you would become an advocate for gun reform. What is it that you saw for your future? What did you want to be when you grew up, so to speak?
Yeah, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. My mom was a teacher. She's actually retiring this year, which is exciting. So, I thought I could maybe be a teacher because that's what I saw every day. I was also really good at biology, so I thought I might be a nurse. But I didn't have these really extravagant, plans for myself. And I had a sort of elementary understanding of what I could do with my life. And I certainly didn't ever think that I would become an advocate for any issue because honestly, I wasn't that tapped into politics. I knew enough about it. And my dad at the time, before the shooting, was a Trump supporter. So I would get into fights with him at the kitchen table. But I didn't know a lot of policy issues in real depth. So I never thought that would be my life. But here we are 8 years later, and I studied political science in college. I got my master's in public policy, and now dedicate my everyday to gun violence prevention work. And it's definitely a path I didn't even know existed.
Well, you are in a pretty significant leadership role in the fight against gun violence, in the fight for gun reform. There are so many students that obviously came out of that same shooting and went in a completely different direction. There's a handful that really became very active. I've gotten to know David Hogg over the years, who's co-founded your organization and who continues to this day to be such a strong advocate for gun reform. But most of the kids didn't. What do you think it was about you that you looked at that day and said, that's it, this is my future, I got to start fighting?
Yeah. I mean, I think a handful of things probably. I started organizing the day after the shooting. I think because I felt a mix of responsibility. I was, again, in my student government at the time. So I thought, maybe I can make an opportunity for my fellow classmates to feel like they have agency again after such a violent instance took away a lot of our innocence and agency. So the day after the shooting, I started organizing a big lobbying trip for us to go to Tallahassee, where 100 of us would end up busing up 6 days after the shooting. And so I think that first instance of organizing where I was like, oh, I actually can do this. I didn't know I could call up a state senator, and I felt really powerful. And like there was actually hope in my ability to do those things. And then in founding March for Our Lives and organizing the march in DC, and then, it kind of was just like something that kept going. I didn't even have a moment to think, okay, do I want to keep doing this? It really felt like a responsibility in a beautiful way, but also in a challenging way, because there's a lot of weight on your shoulders when you're 17 years old, a child, and adults around the country are saying that you're going to save the United States from gun violence. There was a lot of pressure to that. Yeah.
Because we always hear this expression, like there's certain people, moments arise and some people step up to meet those moments. And when I've talked to people like that, and I've had that situation in my own life, it just seems that it happens. It just organically happens. It's not like you go, I should do that. Like you just roll up your sleeves one morning and you just start doing something and you don't even realize what you're doing. Is that how it was for you, that it was like automatic? It just a switch clicked?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gave me the opportunity to discover what my talents are. And it's really fulfilling to figure out what your talents are and really dig into them and use them for good. For me, especially when we started, I was not the like big outspoken, in front of the cameras person. I was very much the behind the scenes organizer. I did, a lot of the operations of like building up this nonprofit and liaising with all of the young people around the country who were starting March for Our Lives chapters. So that was my job. And I felt so much fulfillment in being able to support so many people and keep this machine running. And I'm not going to pretend like, I've spent the last 8 years every waking hour doing this work. I did have to take a few steps back when I was in college because I was doing the work straight for 3 years after the shooting. And so I needed to take a little moment. But when I moved back to the US after going to grad school in England, I felt this compulsion to get back into the work because I had been afforded this amazing education. And I wanted to contribute those, developed skills back to the movement that, made me who I was. And I knew that I could contribute good things. I knew that I knew a lot. And also, I now had this moral authority as a survivor that, makes people listen to me and makes people really like pick up their heads and say, oh, maybe she has a point here because she has personal experience with this thing. So it was certainly never the plan, but it has been such a fulfilling part of my life. And I've been able to build a community of folks who unfortunately have also been impacted. It's a community that shouldn't exist, but gives all of us, hope and power.
So gun violence is now the leading cause of death for young people in our country. Talk to me about the impact of federal rollbacks on gun violence prevention efforts.
Yeah, I mean, ever since the Trump administration came to power, The consequences have been very real and immediate. We're not just talking about like regular policy shifts. We're talking about the real dismantling of systems that actually prevent gun violence. Um, you know, the Trump administration has cut $1 billion from prevention and mental health and public safety. And when you do that, and when you weaken oversight of gun dealers, for example, and when you pull resources away from investigating gun trafficking, which has happened, ultimately you end up with more illegal guns in circulation and fewer tools to stop violence before it happens. So that's what the impact of all these federal rollbacks has been. And it also disrupts the coordination that makes prevention very effective. Shutting down federal infrastructure and cutting funding to community-based programs, means the people doing the work on the ground have less support, even though we know those strategies are saving lives. So the impact is simple: more access to guns and fewer safeguards and fewer resources to keep communities safe, unfortunately.
And these policy shifts most affect the communities that have most impacted by gun violence, right?
Yeah, I mean, Black and brown communities are like very much proportionately, affected by gun violence. Those communities have dealt with the impacts of gun violence, the most severely for a very long time. And that's, a big part of the gun violence prevention work that our movement does, is to make sure we're not only talking about the communities that are most impacted, but we're also making sure they're platformed, and the work that actually prevents violence in those communities, have a spotlight on them. Community violence intervention programs, for example, which are often based in Black and brown communities, are some of the most effective tools we have. They reduce shootings, they interrupt cycles of retaliation, and yet those are exactly the programs that are losing federal support right now. So with cutting of government funding, now a bunch of those programs and other organizations are all competing for a lot of private funding, which is making it so that a lot of those organizations and programs have to close down. And we'll start to see real upticks in violence with the shuttering of those programs in the next few years, which is really devastating. And at the same time, policies are making it easier for firearms to flow into those same neighborhoods. So you have fewer resources to prevent violence and more access to the tools that drive it. And so that imbalance is and will continue to be devastating.
Mm-hmm. You've emphasized youth voter mobilization as a core strategy, and that's so important. Are young voters actually moving the needle on gun policy, or is Washington still largely immune?
Yeah, I mean, back in 2018, gun violence prevention was the #1 issue on young voters' minds when they were going to the ballot box. That's why we saw a huge wave of young voters showing up in those midterm elections, largely because of the after effects of what we did after the shooting in Parkland at our high school. And I'd say that gun violence prevention is definitely still a motivator for young people, but not in the same way that it was 8 years ago. And so, the mission of March for Our Lives and a bunch of our other partner organizations in the space is to kind of recenter that issue back into the minds and hearts of young people, because the reality is they're still fearing gun violence every single day. That part has not gone away. But I think, young people have seen Congress not do much, ever since the March for Our Lives, ever since Sandy Hook, ever since they've been alive, really. There's only been one federal law, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act back in 2022, that's been passed in the last 30 years to prevent gun violence. And so, and people see that there's not really much going on a federal level. Unfortunately, they don't see a lot of the amazing state progress that we've had. There's been over 300 state laws passed since the Parkland shooting in states across the country, red, blue, purple, all over the place. But I think people start to feel apathetic. And so a lot of what March for Our Lives' focus is this year is to wake people back up and say, you have agency on this. Let's go to the ballot box with this issue in our minds. A lot of people don't even know it's the #1 cause of death for young people, American kids. And so raising awareness of that fact is also a big priority of ours. because this issue deserves to be platformed. And there's a bunch of issues to care about and talk about now, but gun violence intersects with almost all of them. And so it deserves to have a big seat at the table.
Mm-hmm. Your organization talks about disrupting power and confronting apathy. Who exactly are you trying to pressure most right now? Is it lawmakers, the gun lobby, the broader culture, or all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of the above. We are focused on, you know, educating our young people, our young audience about the many different ways in which this cycle is perpetuated. I remember back in 2018, I think part of what allowed so many young people to stand up and call for change is because they could actually point to actors that were perpetuating this cycle. We kept saying the NRA, the NRA, the NRA is causing this. It's money in our politics, and we need to dismantle the NRA and make sure we vote out politicians who are supported by the NRA. And I think being able to point to something made this issue that formerly seemed so abstract and a series of isolated tragedies actually seem more connected to this wider systemic issue. So that's what we're trying to do, but with other actors in the gun lobby. For example, this past January, in the last few months, we've launched a public education campaign about the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Now, no one really knows what the NSSF is, but they actually put more money into our political cycles than the NRA these days. And so they fly really under the radar, but they are impacting our politics more than the NRA, and people still think the NRA is synonymous with the gun lobby when it is very much not. It's this much larger system. So talking about the different actors in the gun lobby, of course, calling out those politicians who take money from the gun lobby. And so that'll be a big priority of ours leading into the midterm elections. And also, you know, making sure that we push culture too, like you mentioned. You know, it's a tragedy that when shootings happen, whether they're mass shootings or just kind of everyday shootings, they hardly make the news these days. And if they do, people stop talking about them after, you know, a day. So trying to recenter the voices of survivors, talking about what's actually happening, and forcing people to confront the reality of gun violence in this country. And sometimes it's hard to start those conversations. So you'll see March for Our Lives very much bringing that conversation to other cultural events that are happening this year, because we're going to force people to think about it even when they don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Given the strong gun lobbies and the passion among gun owners, there's only so much that realistically we're going to do in this country. So what specific federal legislation are you actively advocating for the most? From a realistic standpoint.
From a realistic standpoint, yeah. I mean, first, I think funding that has been cut in the last year and a half can be restored. Congress has the power to reinvest in community violence intervention programs and school-based mental health and the research and data systems that help us understand and prevent gun violence. I think second, enforcement can be strengthened again. Restoring oversight of gun dealers, making sure the agencies responsible for investigating gun crime are fully staffed and focused on that work, closing the gaps that allow legal firearms to move across those state lines. And third, I would say we can really rebuild the public health approach. Again, gun violence is a leading cause of death for young people, and we should be treating it like the crisis it is, with coordinated federal leadership and data and prevention strategies. Of course, we always talk about the need for universal background checks, which are policies that between 85 and 92% of Americans believe in, depending on the poll. Once we get to a point where we have folks in Congress who are brave enough and courageous enough to do what's right, we can keep pushing the needle.
Yeah. Well, during the Biden administration, there was a major federal gun safety bill passed, the first in decades. But critics say it didn't go far enough. Do you see it as progress, real progress, or a missed opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I see it as progress. I think that to get a group of bipartisan legislators together on a federal level on this issue has proved very challenging over the years. Like I said, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was the first piece of legislation in Congress in 30 years. So it was a win in that we got people to the table and something passed, which proved that that's possible. So I would call BISCA, is the acronym, a success, but I would say that it was only the start. And because we proved it can be done, we need to keep pushing to make sure more is done, because those critics are right. It did not go far enough. And there's so much more we need to do to prevent gun violence. But first and foremost, it brought people to the table and showed people, that, we can leap over these barriers of supposed polarization and do what's right and protect kids in this country.
You've leaned heavily into digital strategy and youth organization, obviously. How are you adapting activism in an era where attention spans are so much shorter and outrage cycles move so fast?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say there's two answers to that question. One is the gun industry has great marketing, I have to say. They pour millions and millions of dollars into marketing, making people believe that guns actually make you safer, which is not true. And also that, the Second Amendment is immovable and there's nothing we can do to prevent this. But there is. And so we're investing a lot more in kind of traditional marketing. We have a few sort of like marketing stunts, if you will, coming up in the next few months where we'll do things at like big cultural events to really make people turn their heads and think about and talk about this issue in a venue, in a setting that they formerly would never think to. So that's one side of things, is kind of taking it beyond the digital and bringing it into the real world. With actors who normally wouldn't think about or talk about this issue, like entertainment, fashion, etc. And the other answer to this question is, you're right, that attention spans are slow. And so when we do have a moment where we get a ton of attention, oftentimes, unfortunately, it's after a shooting, we have an infrastructure in place at March for Our Lives where we can actually bring people in to be a member of our organization. So maybe, yes, they're brought in at the start because they're outraged about this one specific instance. But if we get them into, our membership program, we can actually make them into long-term advocates on this issue and really engage those kind of, more activist-prone young people to be the folks in their communities that they can be to push this issue along.
You've been in this fight for years now. What gives you real optimism? And what honestly keeps you up at night when it comes to gun violence in America?
Yeah, I mean, I feel real optimism knowing that we've been able to accomplish a lot on a state level. I think, the states are where some of this country's most monumental change have started. The fight to, legalize gay marriage started in the states. And so I think we are going to have to work really hard to keep pushing the needle to get this on a federal level. But the progress we've seen has been amazing. And I think I feel the most hope when I meet other survivors and people who have been in this movement for years and years and decades, because, everyday Americans are tired of this issue, but the folks who actually work on this every day, I promise you, are even more tired. And yet we keep showing up day in and day out because we know what's possible. And we see that shifts are, possible, whether electorally, politically, or just in a single individual. I, for one, have seen a shift in my own dad. He passed away a few years ago, but after the shooting, he really changed his mind in seeing what I was talking about and seeing the advocacy work that I was doing. And, within a period of 6 months, he really believed in what we were saying. And I've seen that shift in so many people. I know it's possible, but it comes from real human interaction and understanding and coming to the table, knowing that we all just want to make this country safer. We just disagree maybe on little bits on how to get there. but not villainizing one another and really just finding common ground has been the most hopeful experience.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point because 6 months from now, we have, I know people say this every time there's an election, but this really is the most critical election in American history for very obvious reasons.
Yeah.
What are advocates like yourself and organizations like yours planning over these next several months with the goal of influencing people in a sense of the way you just spoke about, who come to the table perhaps with some preconceived notions, but perhaps change their opinions and change them in time to change the outcome of this election?
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely focused on organizing and making mistakes impossible to ignore. And that definitely starts with education, breaking down what these federal decisions actually mean in people's day-to-day lives. So it's not just like policy white paper talk. It's actually something people can understand and respond to. Oftentimes people just don't know what's going on and they tune out, but our MO is really educating people on what's going on and making sure they don't look away. We're also, mobilizing all of our young people, all of our young members, making sure they feel supported in organizing voter registration events and talking to their community members about what's at stake in the elections. And definitely focused on accountability. You'll see a lot more campaigns, digital campaigns and beyond from us, making it clear who needs to be voted out and why, who is enabling these systems to continue, and how people can use their voice and their vote to push back. But really, 2026 is going to be a real turning point. Right now, people are watching funding get cut, safeguards rolled back. And I think we're going to see in 2026 that frustration really turning into action in the same way that we did back in 2018.
Well, that would be awesome. And I think what you're doing is so important because it is such a struggle in this country. People are obsessed with guns and seem to not want to make the connection between countries that have really strict gun laws and the lack of gun violence in those countries. It's like 1 + 1 = 2, but they don't want to see it that way.
Right.
My last question has nothing to do with gun violence, and you may not have been asked this before, but every once in a while I like to ask people about who they are in a sense of like getting a window into their soul. And music is often a great window into someone's soul. So give me like the artists you're listening to right now and your favorite artists.
Oh man, that's a great question. Well, I definitely love old music. My parents I grew up with them forcing me to listen to like 60s, 70s, 80s music. I love Frankie Valli.
Wow.
I think someone I've been loving recently is Olivia Dean, who won the Best New Artist at the Grammys this past year. I think she has a very like old soul,
Maybe
but
jazzy.
it's kind of
She's great. She really is great.
jazzy, but modern at the same time. So I've been loving her recently.
Yeah. Well, again, I really respect and appreciate what you do. Please keep it up. And good luck with all the efforts that you have coming up for the midterms, because those elections are so important. And do come back and keep us updated before then.
Will do. Thanks, Andy, so much. I appreciate you having me today.
All righty. Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.